Okay, well, welcome to the first day of the Southeast Linux Fest. This is a talk on the proper care and feeding of a MySQL server for busy Linux admins. For those of you who are watching on the internet, there's a wild, raucous crowd, mostly dressed and mostly sober. My name is Dave Stokes. I'm a MySQL community manager, which means Oracle pays me to go around the world extolling the virtues of MySQL and various products related to MySQL. I'm also your conduit back to management. So if you ever have a question, concern, gripe that you want taken directly to the folks in Redwood Shores, I'm your person. Email is david.stokes@oracle. Twitter handle is @stoker. And these slides are up on slideshare.net/DaveStokes. I gave this presentation a couple months ago at the Scale conference. So if you look for that or you look for proper care and feeding, you'll find it. Oracle usually doesn't allow employees to talk about products until they have a price and a stock keeping unit and everything else published in a catalog. MySQL being open source, we have a little extra leeway. But that being said, I'm going to be talking about some future products that aren't officially cataloged yet. So take what I say about those with a grain of salt. For those of you who aren't aware, MySQL has been around for 20 years. We're still hoping that we're seen as the bright little startup company, but we've been around for 2 decades now. Next year we get to drink. PHP's also been around for 20 years. And I discovered both roughly about the same time. I was running the website for the American Heart Association. I had 8,500 static pages of medical information. And it became obvious to me that I needed a dynamic website. So I wanted a database and I wanted a templating engine. Well, PHP was the closest thing I found to a template engine that I liked, and MySQL was the only database I could afford. So let's talk about databases. I'm assuming that most of you in the audience are Linux admins of some sort, and you're dealing with databases, and they're kind of frustrating because databases are selfish. They want the entire system to self. They don't play well with others. They're messy. They do things to the space that you don't really like. They take a lot of bandwidth. They can also take a lot of your sanity. They also grow all the time. People keep using them. They grow and grow. You have to make more partitions, extend everything. It gets to be a mess. And Linux admins find out that their database ends up taking up a great deal of their life. So basically, databases are toddlers. If you treat them like a toddler, you might be getting what you deserve back. Well, that's the pain of a lot of admins I run into and developers that also have DBA duties. You know, they're trying to do everything to try and keep the release cycle and all that. Oh, by the way, the backup failed on the database. You have to go out and figure out why. Your managers also see databases as kind of the nasty little thorn in the side because you keep whining about them. So what do we do to keep you folks happier? Well, happy databases are fairly simple, especially in the MySQL world. Please run on decent hardware. For years and years and years, we sold MySQL as the product that runs on cheap commodity hardware. Well, 10 years ago, that was true. 5 years ago, that's true. Now your paycheck depends on your database. So that box that you borrowed from the secretary when she kind of got the new box that says Windows ME or Windows Vista on it, you don't want that as your main server anymore. You want to go out and buy decent hardware. Software. You want to run the latest and greatest version of MySQL that you can. Not only are there performance gains and bug fixes, there's also features you want to take advantage of. You have to do backups. And when I mean backups, I mean you save your data off to some device not hooked up to your database server. Store it someplace where it's safe, so if something comes in after that database server, you can start from scratch. Also, you need to know how to take that backup, get the files off there, either an entire database or just a single record out of a file somewhere in that scope, and be able to restore it. If you're doing backups and don't know how to restore them, you're wasting your own time. There's some tools to make life easier. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And we'll also go over some configuration suggestions, and we'll go into a question and answer. So, hardware happiness. Databases love memory. Let me repeat that. Databases love memory. Spend money on good memory. Get the good error correcting stuff. The stuff that your local Best Buy or Fry's might have on sale may not be the optimum solution for you. The more memory, the better. Matter of fact, memory is more important than cores. Why? Well, reading from memory is 100,000 times faster than reading it off a disk. If Chuck here started doing a backflip every second for 100,000 backflips, we can come back in 3 3/4 months and catch the last couple hours of him doing backflips. 100,000 miles is 4 around the world, and a little bit more. Disks are just like thingies. Right now, the hardware world is doing a big revolution in the storage arena. The simple things that you can do is move data to separate controllers or disks. If you have very active databases and you can split them apart, that's great. Especially move your logs away from your data. Logs are kind of a nice serial append only. Everything else is going to be random. So if your controller is trying to do nice and steady progressive stuff and then do random on top of it, it gets messy. Don't run logs on slow devices. It's tempting to get a big fat old Barracuda drive out there that you can just throw stuff on. Might be nice, but it might be slowing you down. I highly recommend rating to your favorite level. Is RAID 10 or better. Don't use consumer grade disks. Once again, the stuff you get from the local hardware vendor that they have on sale, you know, the 15 terabyte drive for $100, probably isn't consumer grade, and it's not designed to run 7/24/365. Also pay attention to your caches on your disk and your controller. There are 2 types, write through or write back. Write through, you send it to the cache, and it sends it to the disk, and then you can proceed on. Write back says, okay, you can proceed on, and then sends it down to the disk. Both lie to you. That's just the nature of the beast. The other thing they'll do is they also have periods where they'll try to auto-tune. Guaranteed that we'll do that during the worst time possible, like when you're trying to run payroll. So if you can adjust that to slack times or shut it off and then do it manually later on, please do so. Something else to look at are things like Fusion IO cards. MySQL in the InnoDB storage engine writes everything twice. So if something crashes, there's a good copy someplace. Fusion IO cards, it's an atomic write. You don't need to do that. So you go from 2 writes down to 1. Network. A couple weeks ago, I was at a customer site, and they ran everything on one network. I was wondering why everything was getting slower and slower and slower. Never put your database, expose it to the outside world unless you like reading it all the time. Any data you get from customers, scrub rigorously. Don't trust anything. If you've seen the XKCD cartoon of little Bobby drop tables, that's a good example there. I also recommend keeping a separate network for replication and or backup. I've had a period of my life where I didn't, and the LDAP server went to do a massive update. 100,000 employees, brought down replication. Not a good thing. The other thing you have to be careful of in the MySQL world is the way we authenticate things. When you connect, the first thing it does is this a good host for someone to connect from? If it is, it says, okay, is it a good username and password? Now, what happens there is your boss working from home might be seen as a different account than boss working at his desk. And you'll usually find this out just about the time he's doing performance reviews for you, and he can't get into the files that he wants, and then has to call you to tell you what's going on, and that it does affect your performance rating. MySQL authentication is overly enthusiastic. We're making some changes to that, but the first match in the table gets in. So you might want to do some pruning and review of your user table. Also, something I highly recommend, we'll cover this later, there's a switch in your configuration not to do DNS lookups when authenticating. It goes by the IP address. The last thing you need to do is have everything wait as your DNS server has a bad page and can't figure out how to resolve everything. So please go by IP addresses. Slave servers. MySQL Replication has been around since the 3.2 days, and it's fairly easy to implement. If you've ever set up replication on an Oracle database, it's a week of typing, and then you get to try it out. MySQL Replication you can now set up in about 5 minutes if you're a slow typer. The slave hardware, I recommend being bigger, badder than your standard master server. Why? Well, it has to do more work in a shorter period of time to get caught up. So don't skimp on hardware on the slave. Also, use the MySQL utilities to clone the masters and set up slaves. Dr. Bell here will be talking after me. He's the king of the MySQL utilities, and can go into that. These are simple Python scripts, easy to extend, very clearly written, and they do wonderful things. There's 28 of them now, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But they have one that just lets you copy everything over master, copy over the permissions, off you go. They even have one that will just do all that in one step for you. Software. Once again, run the latest, greatest version of MySQL that you can. We know for some of you, you don't want to touch that because it's working. You don't want to upgrade it. You know, hey, 5.0 was great for my predecessor, and it's still working. We're trying to make it a little bit easier for you. With 5.5, 5.6, and 5.7, our QA team is now working on both upgrades and downgrades to make it better for you. But if you're not running at least 5.5, please consider upgrading. There's a lot of features and performance stuff in there that you really want. Unless you're a small shop and you're running everything off one box, it's best to keep the database to its own separate server. Why is that? Well, as I mentioned earlier, they're kind of like toddlers. They don't play well with others. They contend for resources. If you have two things running on the box and the database gets stalled, it's very quickly to get into a swapping state and things just go to heck rather quickly. If you're going to set up a caching layer on the box, like with Memcached or Redis or something like that, do that, but pay attention to your memory loads because it's very easy to get the two things contending and you end up with 10 pounds of manure trying to go on an 8-pound sack. It just doesn't work. As mentioned earlier, thou shalt make backups. Make sure you back up your data so it frequently verges being painful, and then try to figure out another way to back it up. Know how to restore the entire instances, the entire database, or just a table. There's some tools and utilities that will do a diff for you that you find out the line that you need to put back in because something got skipped. Make sure you know how to play that. Keep your offsite backups in a very secure place. Years ago, a friend of mine had a whole bunch of data backed up at a data storage facility in Northridge, California. They had an earthquake, data center's down, no problem, we'll just go over to the Iron Mountain Vault down the street and get our backups and start again on fresh hardware. Well, go down the Iron Mountain's flattened. Ouch. By the way, no one ever got fired for doing too many backups. Paranoia is your friend. I see one gentleman back there kind of nodding. Replication. MySQL replication is easy to set up. Right now we have two types of replication. Async, which has been around forever. Basically the slave grabs a copy of the changes made to the master's data and applies it. It's what 99% of the world is running out there. Now semi-synchronous, the master waits for an acknowledgement from at least one slave saying, hey, I got a copy of the data. I may not have written it to disk, but I do have a copy of the data. So master server, you can go on, keep doing what you're doing. If you need to make sure that your data is a little more protected, look into semi-synchronous replication. Now, there's three forms of replication. Statement, which is whatever SQL you type on the master gets copied over to the slave. There's row, the results of that SQL statement are copied over to the slave. And mixed, which has some heuristics to figure out which is the most effective between the two. There's some big differences between the three of those. Read the man pages because you might be able to get away with doing row, which is a little bit faster. Replication was single-threaded before 5.6. Means everything that was replicated had to go through one door, like getting on an airplane. With 5.6, we made it multi-threaded, but for different databases. In 5.7, as long as the transactions aren't overlapping or contending with each other, you get full multi-threading. Replication filters. You don't need to replicate everything. They haven't added a state to the United States in my lifetime. So if you have a table, for instance, that has state information, maybe back it up once a week, once a month. Something like your accounts payable. You might want to back up every hour. And doing it by replication makes it simpler. Also, you can filter which tables you want. And with 5.7, you'll be able to change the filters on the fly. Something's going wrong in manufacturing, they're having problems, and suddenly you want to replicate more of their data because you fear it's going to go down. You can change that as you're going. With 5.6, we introduced something called global transaction IDs. For replication, this means every transaction is unique. A slave server can tell whether it's seen this transaction before. If you bring up a new slave, and you can go through the list of transactions and check them in. The ones it doesn't know, it goes hunting for. It used to be if you're running replication, you brought on a new slave, you had to go out to find a file position on the master and possibly a file position on the slave and say, okay, start here, catch down to here. Global transactions, you say, okay, go to the master, start at number 1, and keep going until you catch up. It's a lot easier. It saves a lot of time and sanity. And it's also a lot easier if you're doing things like bringing up a box, a virtual image, and you're running something like Ansible to go out there and grab all the data and get everything set up. Also, something we did with 5.6 is we stopped storing the replication data in log tables and started storing it in NODB. Well, why is that? NODB knows how to recover from a crash. NODB crashes, it goes through the various redo logs, it says, okay, we know this is a good transaction, we'll commit it. Well, now that we're saving the replication data in that table, NODB knows how to take care of all that, and it keeps it all in sync. Let's see. Also, if you're running row-based replication and you're changing a bunch of data, and the column is 300, or the table is 300 columns wide, all you're going to send over is the ID of that table and whatever changed columns are. You're not going to send over the other columns that haven't changed. Saves you a little bit of bandwidth and time. Multi-master replication. Every show I go to, someone says, we're running multi-master and we're real happy with it, except when it crashes. Basically, multi-master is the idea is you have 2 servers. You can write to either one of them. The trick is usually set up one server to do auto increments that start with odd numbers and another one that does even numbers. For the folks who want to watch it and really babysit it, it works fairly well. We don't recommend it. But if you do it, please watch it. Something we have with 5.7 is multi-source replication. If you want to have one big bad replicant server out there and have a whole bunch of masters send their data to that box, you can now do it. If you're sharding data, it's like you've cut up your customer file over 5 different boxes, you can bring all 5 of those back to one replicant box as long as the shards don't overlap. Okay, and what's the name of that utility? MySQL RPL MS, okay? So if you want multi-source, you can do it before 5.7. If you're in a big Oracle database shop, and it does happen, one of the great things is being part of Oracle is the big folks who run the huge databases, who write the big checks to Uncle Larry, for Chuck and I are grateful for. You can actually back up your data onto the STB backup devices. These are huge, huge devices that are designed to do nothing but suck up data. So if you do have a big Oracle instance, check into this for your backups. Also, MySQL can use the Oracle database firewall and audit fault. Usually, if you're an enterprise customer, this is something you're going to look into. If you're doing PCI compliance, this is a cheap way to pass a lot of the hurdles you have to get there. I can talk about that offline about that. We also have a recently announced database firewall. You train the firewall by running your application, so it knows what the queries are supposed to look like. And then you turn on the firewall in active mode, and if someone's trying to do SQL injection or doing something that doesn't quite fit the whitelist of commands, it will error out and not let that through. Replication for backup. Generally, MySQL Replication is going to use three threads. The master to the slave, that's for the changes going down there. The slave will have a thread that writes everything to a log file, and then it has the actual applier that reads that log and copies it onto its own set of data on the slave. If you're doing backups, you don't have to shut down these two. So the master keeps sending the changes, or the slave keeps grabbing the changes off the master. What you do is you turn off the logging to the data thread, flush your tables, run your backup, and then restart this, and it will catch up. Easy way to do backups. Tools to make life easier. If especially you're not a regular DBA sitting down watching everything all the time, you're a Linux admin and you don't really have 99% of your time to spend just babysitting the database, I recommend monitoring your database with some sort of tool. I don't care if it's Nagios, I don't care if it's the MySQL Enterprise Manager, which is a great tool. But you need something that will not only record data, but give you a histogram of what's going on so you can see what happened overnight. Nasty things happen at 3 in the morning when you're trying to sleep. Administration tools. I'm a dinosaur. I grew up doing everything on command line. Don't do that anymore. I use MySQL Workbench, which I can show you later at the table. It's a tool that's designed to automate a lot of the painful stuff that you have to do, that you can do by hand. Also, something I recommend is some sort of documentation on your instances. Entity relationship maps, any design specs, keep those around, because when things hit the fan, you want to be able to go back and double check things. And once again, backup, backup, backup. So monitoring, active or semi-active. The active will watch what's going on, and if something's out of bandwidth, it will send you a notification. You might have your favorite tool. The one that I recommend, if you can afford it, is the Enterprise Monitor. You can do things with Nagios, Cacti, etc. Percona has some plugins that are real interesting. You might have something that I'm not aware of that I'm not mentioning that works good, but you want something watching your database for you. Now, there are other tools out there semi-active. MySQL Workbench here has a nice dashboard that uses the sys schema. What I like about that is it's a free tool. It's our second most popular download. And the one advantage it has over PHP MyAdmin is that it's not tied to your PHP website. So the script kiddies aren't going to find that page and start trying to guess passwords. It's a standalone application that connects like any other application to the database. There's some things you can do with code and other stuff out there, but if you have a favorite, we can talk about that later. Okay, so you're running your Linux boxes, and something pops up on your server, you're not quite sure what's going on. Believe it or not, there's supposed to be a very, whoops. Supposed to be a big picture of a hippopotamus with just the nose and eyes sticking out there. So, figure out why that's not there. So, MySQL Workbench. As I mentioned before, this is our second most popular download. If you're doing things like setting up user accounts, changing config files, bringing up the server, bringing down the server, great tool for that. It has a visual explain to help you tune your queries. It will tell you where things are going bad and give you hints. It's a great admin tool for doing backups and imports. You no longer have to go through when you're adding a user and do the update user set. Select _priv equals single quote uppercase Y single quote comma delete _priv equals single quote uppercase Y. Just go there and you click boxes. It's all checkboxes driven. Also, we added sysschema support with 5.7. You can also get it for 5.6. The sysschema uses two sets of databases. We have the performance schema and the information schema. In the old days of MySQL, we were considered a toy database by a lot of Oracle and DB2 type admins because we didn't have a way to tell you what was going on at a very low level. Well, we gave that functionality in 5.5 and 5.6. But it's kind of like going to IKEA and getting that stupid little Allen wrench and a whole bunch of timber and those little funny connectors and being told to make your own warehouse. It wasn't an easy way to see stuff. So one of our engineers, a gentleman named Mark Leith, came up with a whole bunch of views, stored routines, and procedures to give you the standard questions you're going to have, like who's hogging my I/O, which queries are running without indexes, where is my buffer space being spent, and they're all fairly easy there. And with Workbench, there's a nice little dashboard that reports all this information for you. Workbench also has an entity relationship mapper. I use that when I go to a customer site and say, yeah, we have this product and it has a database, but we know nothing about it. This will draw a map of where the various tables interact with each other, where the foreign keys hook up, what does what to where. And if you need to change it, you can change it and then roll the update back into production. MySQL utilities. As I mentioned earlier, these are written in Python, easy to extend. There's one that will set up replication and set up automatic failover. So if the master goes down, one of the slaves will be promoted automatically. Ways to copy user settings between boxes, copy data. One of my favorite is grep for bad processes and kill them. So if you know your boss runs something horrendous every so often, you can set this up to look for that and kill it off. There's one for moving binary logs, which will probably be highlight of the next talk. Column G. If you ever run into a situation and you remember that there's a customer underscore ADDR column somewhere in this database, but you don't remember what table it is, there's a nice little script to find that for you. And there's 28 of them, so they're very handy. If you're using the Percona toolkit, this isn't a direct replacement, it's an addendum. It does some functions that Percona doesn't do. And once again, it's free. If you're an old Oracle DBA or DB2 DBA, Toad is available for MySQL. This was the original query tool back in the old IBM days where things were just transitioning over from cards. So configuration suggestions. Turn off DNS lookups. The last thing you want is to have your database stall because you have a bad zone transfer in your DNS box. Also, I recommend keeping your statistics persistent. What happens, MySQL learns as you run your queries how to efficiently do things. In the old days, you shut down the box, bring it back up, has to start square one to figure out how to do that. Well, now we can save off some of that information so that when you bring the box down, when it comes back on, it doesn't have to learn everything from square one. It has a little bit of smarts built in. With 5.7, you'll be able to tune your log level. Every junior DBA at some time or another has stopped operations because they ran themselves out of disk space. So with 5.7, you can log just errors, errors and warnings, or errors and warnings with notes. And you can change this on the fly. So if something's going wrong and you're just running errors, you can tune this up to get more and more information. Also, if you have a lot of good tools that read syslog, we can now write out all that information to syslog. Another config that I recommend is turning off the query cache. It's the default in 5.7. Query cache is something that we used to say, turn it on. It's great if you ran a query before. The server will check to see if that query's already run. We've got a copy of the results out there, so you don't have to rerun the query, just send a copy of the results back. Great idea, single-threaded, doesn't quite work as well as we thought. If you really do need to cache something, use something like Memcache or Redis, or put in your application. And when you turn off the query cache, you'll free up more memory for the database to do other things. And the other tuning recommendation I make Set your InnoDB buffer size to 75 to 85% of RAM. And for 99% of you out there, that's all the tuning you'll probably have to worry about. So, some hints. How many of you have been a sysadmin for under a year? Under 5 years? Okay. Everyone else in the room, for those who are 5 years or under, we've all learned the hard way to be damn stingy with handing stuff out. It's a lot easier to say no and fight it than to have some idiot suddenly get root privilege and wipe everything out on you. You've learned that the hard way. Same with databases. It's easier to say no than constantly restoring. Now, two things you can do is in their home directory, the .my.cnf file, is turn on safe updates or I am a dummy. What does this do? Well, if they do something like delete from employee, where employee ID equals 15, it doesn't do anything. But if your new employee comes in there and says, delete star from employee and forgets about the where clause, they're not going to wipe out the entire employee database. Schema. Please use. I know you're not DBAs, and there's a lot of stuff that you really don't have time to pay attention to, but especially things like who's hogging your resources and which queries are problematic are routine pains in the butt. And it helps if you have an idea what a normal level of pain in the butt is for your database. Big hit number 3. With 5.7, we want default security. In the past, you threw up a database, especially in the cloud, Rackspace or AWS or something like that. If they threw in the generic MySQL in there, there was no root password. There was a test database. There was an anonymous account. An anonymous account has no username and no password. And earlier I mentioned that the MySQL authentication system was kind of promiscuous. The first one who kind of qualified for any of the parameters got in. You could set up a database in the cloud and have the script kiddies playing out before you even got a chance to attach to it. So with 5.7, we're forcing a root password, no more test database, no more anonymous account. You can set up password rotation. So if your company says passwords will be changed every 90 days, at least one uppercase character, one special character, and no shorter than 6 characters, you can now support that. Also with what's interesting was in 5.6.6, you can store encrypted authentication credentials, not in clear text, in a file in your home directory. So when you connect to it, it's not passing passwords so they can be sniffed. Here's an example. You use the config editor, set up a profile called finance, and go that way. It sends everything encrypted, and you log in. So that in 35 minutes was the basic stuff for DBAs or non-DBAs trying to watch MySQL databases. We've got plenty of time for question and answers. I got to apologize. I normally have a big box of swag, including stuffed dolphin toys. And for folks who ask questions, I throw out a dolphin toy to encourage participation. Unfortunately, FedEx hasn't delivered it yet, so I'm kind of stuck. But if you have any questions, I'm here all weekend. This is my contact information. So if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. If you have any comments or any other suggestions for your fellow Linux admins, love to hear them. Boy, you're a quiet group. No questions at all? Yes, sir. Anyone looking for a job? What sort of parameters do you want for the employee? Okay, MySQL, Postgres, and smart people. Okay. Willing to relocate to Atlanta. Okay, doesn't that preclude the smart people? Never mind. Touche. Well, if that's the only question, Up next at the top of the hour is Dr. Charles Bell. We'll be talking about binary logs. After him is Bruce Momgen from the Postgres project. Bruce is one of those very entertaining speakers that even if you don't run Postgres, it's good to listen to him because he has some interesting ideas and can spawn some thought processes in your head that you don't normally have. If you have anything else, catch me this weekend. The Oracle MySQL table is right over there by the window. And thank you all for coming out.